How can we work together to unlock private investment? The DFF journey, for those of you taking notes at home on our agenda, happens in 3 phases. It will start with a bunch of context setting. In fact, this panel that's being set behind me is our first exercise around understanding context for how we will move forward in unlocking private investment in African markets. We'll move into conversations that you'll have at your tables around possibilities. What might be possible in how we will unlock private investment. And ultimately, by the time we end tomorrow, we will have moved into action-based conversations, actionable things that we as a team can take forward to move the needle on unlocking private investment. So that's our high-level agenda across our 2 days. It looks like our panel is just about set. So Julie, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. As we are just setting up the mics for sound, allow me to welcome our panelists to come up and take their seats on the stage. We have an incredible panel to kick off the discussion this morning on private investment in African markets. We're here to set the agenda. On the panel, let me welcome to come up and take seats up on the stage, Aliko Dangote, who is Chairman and CEO of Dangote Group, headquartered in Nigeria, but based across parts of Africa. Honorable Ken Ofori-Atta, Minister of Finance of Ghana, please, wherever you will be most comfortable, please do come up and join us. Also, Honorable Abdurrahman Sisse, who is the Budget Minister, Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. The Managing Director, once again, of the World Bank, Joachim Levy, please do come up and take a seat. And Helen Tarnoy is with us as well, Managing Director, Aldwych International, doing an incredible amount of work across the continent. Please do. And so I do hope we will be joined by Honorable Kenneth Ofori-Atta in a short while, and we shall just await the mics and get started. Thank you. So we will get started with our panel session, and so we don't have to wait for the mics. I'm going to pass mine around if you are all right with that, and we can get on and not waste any time. Of course, we have heard from the President this morning, we've heard from the Managing Director. And what we really want to do is tap into the challenges and the opportunities from your perspectives across the continent. We want to understand what can governments do better in terms of policy, in terms of the different rules, regulations, the laws. What do we expect to see? We want to understand from the private sector, what do you need, but also where can we challenge you to do better as well? What is the responsibility in terms of development from the private sector as opposed to just profit? And these are some of the conversations we're going to have this morning. I think my first question is going to come to the private sector. It will be addressed to Helen Tarnoy and Dangote. Aliko, to you. We want to understand the challenges that you face and your needs ultimately right now. But as you address that, we would like to get a sense of where the greatest opportunity for transformation for Africa comes from, not just for profit, but ultimately for change, for development, and for benefits to the people of the continent. Where does the greatest potential lie? So, thank you very much, Helen. I will begin with you. Yes, indeed.
Try again. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a big question, and I think if I had $1 for every time I was asked that question, I'd be a richer woman than I am. And there's no single answer. I can only talk for the energy sector because it's all I really know about. And you know, in the end, it's not just about profit. I mean, if we don't make a profit, we can't do the next project. Everybody knows that. But at the same time, energy, power underpins every other aspect of life in our countries, whether it be in Africa or anywhere else. You can't pump water without energy. You can't connect people to the great world of information without energy. It is absolutely vital, almost no matter what type of energy it is. It's really, really important that people have access to electricity. I'm not one to throw rocks at governments, let alone utilities. I've run a utility myself, and I know just how hard it is. But there are some things that must be done. And in places where they are being done, we are seeing transformation, such as in Kenya, for example, your home country, where the consumer of power pays the cost of power. It's as simple as that. And where countries, governments are reluctant to raise tariffs to a level where they cover the cost of generating power, you see enormous deficits, lack of power. That is, I think, the single most important thing that governments can do, is have the courage to explain and persuade that consumers not only have to pay the real cost of power, but they have to pay. The level of theft and the level of loss in the systems is astronomical, and it prejudices not only the ability of those countries to attract more investment, but also it prejudices the people who honestly do pay their bills, because for everyone who pays his bill, there's somebody sitting next door who's not paying. So effectively, he's paying twice. So those are the fundamentals on the government side. On the private sector side, well, where are we? How many of us are there actually delivering transformational projects? It's hard, it's difficult. People talk about patient capital. You've got to be very patient, but there just aren't enough of us. We are a small company, and yet with the help of the World Bank and the development finance institutions, we have developed and closed the financing of 3 major power projects in sub-Saharan Africa in the last 3 years. But where's everybody else? So that's my challenge to the rest of the private sector. We've got to do better.
Thank you so much. So, Aliko, I come to you now with the very same question. What are the challenges? What do you want from public sector? What do you expect from governments? But even more than that, in terms of potential and balancing purpose and profit, where is the greatest potential for Africa? Where does it lie, please?
Well, thank you very much. I think, first of all, maybe I would like to thank the World Bank for organizing this kind of forum in Ghana, which is sort of Africa, and I think it's really great. I mean, it shows the concern and also the seriousness of World Bank to unlock private sector investment in Africa, which I think is very, very important. There are a couple of challenges, which I can mention quite a lot of them, but maybe I will mention just a few, which is, if you look at unstable macroeconomic environment, also capital markets are not very deep. There's poor infrastructure, and then you look at the absence of, single-digit interest rates. Because with the kind of interest rates that we have in Africa, it is very, very difficult to develop in terms of, you are paying 25%, 30% interest rate. It is almost impossible, to have a growth. So we need to really find how do we resolve this issue of high interest rate, poor legal and regulatory framework. And one of the biggest, I think, that we need to look into 2 things which are also hindering, development. One is power, and I keep saying that no power, no growth. So we need to make sure that we tackle that issue of power. And then inconsistencies in government policies. The governments, they have to be very, very consistent. It's not good where now you set the rules of the game, And when somebody is about to score the goal, he will realize that the goalpost had actually been moved behind his back. So, and it has happened in a lot of countries, which I think is very, very key in terms of, for us to make sure that, yes, we really do understand. And then we need to really monitor smuggling under declaration of, this adulteration of products. This will really, really, really help if governments can really look at, okay, fine. And then the inefficiency in our borders, because the borders need to be operated seamlessly, because if you look at smaller countries, you now look at ECOWAS. If I'm a small company here and I'm producing things in Ghana, it means that, yes, I should access the 15 other markets, and which means I have no limit to growth. And that's what needs to be done, so that I don't have to go and set up factories all over in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, Nigeria, Senegal. No, from here, you can actually ship and you go and now attack the other markets. So we should allow free movements of goods and services, goods, people and services. The opportunities, as you said, is almost 20 hours every day. I cannot quantify the opportunities. We have enormous amount of opportunities. Let me give you, for example, today in Africa, our imports of food alone is about 35 billion. It's going to 10 billion by 2025. By 2025 is just next few years. 2025, we're talking about 7-8 years at most. So you look at it now, for example, just 2 items, or maybe 3, the amount of sugar, the amount of rice, the amount of maybe wheat we import in West Africa is madness, and we are saying that, yes, Africa has 65% of the arable land today as we speak. So if you have this kind of arable land that we have, and when you look at the world map, you look at the latitude of where Africa is, or mainly West Africa is, it's the same with Brazil. So if they are able to produce most of these agricultural things in Brazil, why can't we produce them in Africa? So you can see that the opportunities are there, and we have tried. You see, before, when you talk about agriculture, we as Dangote, we don't really look into agriculture. But right now, we're going in big time. Today, we are doing 1 million tons of rice, which we will achieve. We have ordered 10 rice mills to produce 1 million, all at once. And we are doing also sugar, which is about 1.5 million, tons, which we are going to achieve by 2023 in the next 5-6 years. And this will save a lot of FX.
Thank you for that. Agriculture is a very painful thing for Africa because we've been told 65% of the arable land is here in Africa. We know that small-scale farmers across Africa probably offer the greatest potential for turnaround and growth for our continent. We're going through an incredible biting drought across parts of Africa, and yet this is the greatest opportunity for us. I come now to the ministers. It seems utterly ridiculous, and it's a conversation we keep having, but you've heard the investors in our continent share their challenges with you this morning. So I come to each of you with a question. What is working, and what are you doing specifically to encourage greater investments, private sector money into Africa, knowing that private sector funds are looking for consistency, they're looking for returns, they're looking for stability? Minister Cisse, let me start with you. Thank you. Oh, sorry, please go. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again. I would like to thank also the World Bank for the invitation. It's great to be here. As you say, we face huge challenges, and the biggest one, when I look, is the demographic transition. We basically need to find 800 million jobs before 2050. So we need to face it. and we need to do it. So the public sector is doing its side. In Côte d'Ivoire, for example, what we've been trying to do over the past years was to work on a couple of pillars. One of them was macroeconomic resilience. So we had to make sure that the macro environment was good. So we work on fiscal deficit. We try to keep it around the 4% level. We work on our debt to GDP ratio, which is around 40%. Inflation, around 1% in the country. Also currency. And because our currency is pegged to euro, it's relatively stable. So these are basically one of the first things that we've been working on, making sure that the macroeconomic environment was really stable. Second thing was improving business environment. It was a nightmare for companies to open business in Côte d'Ivoire. You had to go through like a lot of different offices in order to open a business. So we try really to focus on facilitating trade in the country. Now you can create a company in less than 24 hours. The cost of creation is $30. And we actually also put a strong emphasis on governance. Governance is key. One thing that we did was basically to dematerialize and use ICT as much as possible in order to make sure that you reduce manpower intervention for businesses. So right now you can pay now your tax online. You can declare your tax online. There's a lot of different processes that you can do online without going to the tax administration, for example. We also work on tax fairness, because there's nothing worse than see your competitors paying tax and you don't pay tax. So we need to make sure that we have basically a good competition in the country. And that's something that we work on. Now, everything that you do in Côte d'Ivoire in terms of tax control is automatized. So we basically have our database, and we know exactly which company we need to go and look for. So this is basically the thing that we've been working on in order to make sure that things get better. Now, I'm glad to hear that the Dangote Group is working on rice. We have that challenge in Côte d'Ivoire. Rice production is a big challenge. We keep on importing rice in our country. And there are a couple of other commodities that we keep on importing. So we want to hear also more about what the private sector needs. It's a win-win situation. We need to know better what they need so that we can actually work together and do something that works.
And this is exactly the kind of engagement. It's first and foremost the willingness to engage, the building of trust. And I actually see movement forward in many ways through these kinds of stakeholder engagements. Minister Ofori Atta, your actions with respect to this, but also, you know, the critical issue was raised by Aliko, our borders. Our borders present such a challenge to us, and yet they are such an opportunity. Intra-Africa trade, please, over to you.
Hello. Thank you very much. First, thank the World Bank for this, and welcome all of you to our beautiful country. Thank you for coming. You know, I think one of the challenges, as the President said, we've been in power for 5 months. And we come back to the issue of power, as Aliko is saying. And it's on two levels, in terms of A, how we have mismanaged it, and also not looked at a renewable option. So, as the President said, we're trying to clear the backlog so that we can get back into some decency as to how we negotiate these contracts and ensure that there's stable power for everybody. So that's the power issue on the megawatt side. And then I think we have a power issue of the empowerment of our people and the economy to be able to make sure that we realize the objectives that we have. And so for us in these 5 months, was to see whether we can get our hands around the macroeconomic framework. Because in the end, without stable macroeconomic framework and a discipline, we have issues. Our people cannot produce and investors will not come in. We also have to move to supporting the skills base of our people so they can take advantage of the opportunities that we are opening in the economy. Because we need to be very deliberate about indigenous empowerment to be able to partner with foreign partners who are coming. And that's something that means skills, making sure that the financial environment gives them opportunities to be able to partner on an equal basis. And basically create what we call economic freedom. And that led to the series of abolishment of taxes so that people will be free to use their creative energies. So that's something that we constantly think about. And we are running a budget deficit. We are also running a budget deficit, which means that we don't have savings. On the government level, corporates have not done well the past few years. They also don't have, and because of the level of income, national savings are also low. Clearly, that has to be filled. And this is where the issue of bridging the gap as to what people know about Ghana or Africa, and the information asymmetry to get people attracted to that, and also for them to be able to bring the needed resources to fill the gap. But I think for us as a government, with the intention of quadrupling or 10 times the size of the GDP we have in a certain framework, have to be also conscious that, come that realization, Ghanaians are the center of that development. So yes, create the macro conditions, embolden your people, empower your people to be participant in a shared space, and then let the world, move in a direction that we are looking for.
I will assume that the mic was agreeing with you when it roared. So, but I like that you're referring to the hardware and the software as well. So the need to really empower the thinking. And I'll stay on that note as I come to you, Joachim, and the absolute need we have to grow, empower, and support small and medium-sized enterprises across Africa, and to really assist the most fragile of economies. Let me come to you on that. We talk about formal in Africa, but the normal is actually the informal. That is the honest-to-goodness truth. And so how do we empower and grow these people who strive so hard, but just need capacity building and support to get to the next level? What is the World Bank doing?
All right, I think that are many ways to do that. And there are things that we, as multilaterals, can do. I think that what the minister mentioned about the way you collect taxes, the way you design taxes is very important for small enterprises to have the adequate, say, tax burden, and especially to free it from some vagaries of tax collection is extremely important, and it makes a huge difference to small and medium companies. Now, in addition to this, of course, there are several other things that are related to really, as you mentioned, create capacity. And there, I can cite, for instance, some projects that IFC has been doing in many countries in terms of, ranging of how to create adequate management tools and provide this type of training to small companies, creating toolkits that can be really used in a large number of companies, sometimes even thinking about succession and some things that are very specific to small companies. We have recently signed an MOU in terms of also of helping to disseminate the international financial reporting standards, the IFRS, through small medium companies. Why is that? Because if you don't have clear accounts, it's very difficult to get credit and you go to the bank and what you show. And more generally, of course, we also, in addition to all this capacity building, we do work with governments and with banks and other institutions to facilitate the access to credit, and there will be a part of our private sector window also, for instance, the agriculture sector, to facilitate access through blending mechanisms to lower interest rates, and also develop de-risking mechanisms. Again, we have examples of cooperatives and so on, where we have done this effectively. So it goes from taxes to the business environment, to training companies, and then, of course, access to credit.
Thank you so much for that. I was going to go into risk mitigation efforts, and I know there are organizations like the African Development Fund in the room that are doing many things alongside other organizations. Aliko, in terms of risk mitigation in Africa, is enough being done? And aside from that, what do you think the smaller businesses, alongside the businesses, require to really build capacity and to put funds into African economies?
Well, I think one of them, is the, what do you call it, the improved macroeconomic environment. One of the reasons that you need to do, you can also access MIGA, and which I think will help in terms of this, and also credit enhancement by the government. We have something like what we do in Nigeria, where the central bank will guarantee for you to have a single-digit interest rates. So money that they've taken away from the banks, in terms of putting it in their reserves, earning zero interest, they can lend you. They don't lend you directly, but they lend you through the, bankers. So I think, if they also make sure that the policy is there, there's consistency of policy, it will help. But the biggest of them all, most of these small businesses can never ever survive without a stable power. Because
comes back to energy.
Yes, comes back to energy. Because if you look at it today, 48 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, which I think they have about 1 billion population, they only generate the same amount of electricity with Spain. That does not make sense. A place where I come from, for example, is a place up north called Kano. We have about 21.8 or so million population there, okay, in Kano. But the entire power supply we get from the grid is less than 35 megawatts. And when you look at it, majority of our cement factories, they have dead capacity of 45 megawatts each. So these are the issues that we need to do. We must help them in terms of making sure that the power is available. Because if not, they will never ever grow. Because most of their money will keep going to diesel, buying diesel to generate their own power. They have to service their own generators. Because most of these generators are supposed to be standby. But the generators are the ones that are giving you consistent power. Then the grid gives you standby.
Thank you. So, Helen, of course, I have to come to you, and I really want to focus the next question on the right tools for fragile areas such as Kano, where the energy is very little. In Kenya, in the northern frontier counties that sit alongside Somalia and Sudan, we have similar challenges. Nobody wants to go in and invest in those areas, and yet the potential to transform conditions is so immense. So are there enough tools, and if not, what would you suggest needs to be introduced?
Well, another very difficult question. The glib answer is that we will go anywhere, but that is caveated by the statement, we will go anywhere where our people are safe. We are currently trying, or have been trying, to develop a power project in South Sudan. If anywhere needs power, it's South Sudan. But I can't send people there if I think they're in danger, so I'm afraid that project is on hold. It goes back again to what I said earlier. There just aren't enough people willing to do the hard work that it takes to get these projects away. You could accuse us as a company of having taken perhaps the easier route. We have projects in construction in Kenya, in Ghana, and indeed in Nigeria. And so why aren't we doing things in more difficult places? Well, actually we are. We have a project in advanced development in Chad, which is not an easy place to do business. What characterizes a lot of these countries is that the concept of independent power is either not welcome, because there is a feeling that power is something that the state should provide, or else it's new and we're groundbreaking. We're having to devise everything from scratch. The demands of project finance to get these larger projects away, or even smaller projects, are very, very challenging for governments' counterparts who've never done them before. But this has to be done. It has to change. It's not all doom and gloom. We are seeing movement. But as Aliko said, without power, people are stymied. There's very little they can do. And so we must find a way to attract more investors into power. We do not see the big US and European utilities investing in Africa. I'm not very sure why, because when I started working in Africa in the late 90s, the US utilities, I worked for one of them, were investing in Africa, but they have left. They've gone to places where, frankly, it's easier to do business. And we need to reverse that trend. And I hope that over the next couple of days, we will find ways of reassuring people that the perception of risk in Africa is a lot greater than the actual risk. The World Bank has facilities which mitigate financing risk as long as governments are willing to play their part in ensuring a macroeconomic stability, in ensuring that people pay their bills and that they are told that they must pay their bills. We'll get there.
Thank you for that. So it brings me back to the ministers and to the government role in really de-risking and reducing uncertainty. We are interdependent. We heard it from the president and we've spoken about it. Our greatest opportunity lies in trading across borders, whether it's energy, whatever it might be. What role does regional integration, what role does cooperation play in all this? And you might be doing wonderful things within your country, and if your neighbor is falling apart, you know, how do we start to ensure, and in particular right now in East Africa, it's South Sudan on fire. It's South Sudan on fire. So how does Africa stand up and ensure we are safeguarding the gains that had been achieved, but also ensuring that as a continent we're able to move forward by stabilizing our countries? It's not an easy one, but what do you think, Minister Cisse? You can start.
I mean, regional integration is key. Nothing to discuss about it. But it's not that easy to be done, because every country has its own sovereign things that sometimes they want to keep. But we have to work towards regional integration. If you look at Cote d'Ivoire, for example, in energy, we actually export energy to our neighboring countries. Between 2011 and now, we increased our capacity by 40%. And most of our neighboring countries actually receive part of the energy that we produce. This is something that we definitely going to continue to do over the next coming years. IFC has invested in some of the projects that we have in order to help de-risking, because risk was one of the big issues. And we use MIGA, we use IFC in order to facilitate some of the transactions that we did. Still, if you want to keep on talking about regional integration, you basically need infrastructures between a region, which is really difficult to finance. And that's where we need also to see how all the DFI can actually help in financing intra-regional product. That's really important, and that's really key. Now you have another way of developing intra-regional trade. It's not only physical infrastructure. We can also look at all the technology solution that we can have in order to reduce the financing need that we need. If you take, for example, mobile money, Kenya is definitely one of the leaders in the sector. Cote d'Ivoire now is actually also working towards using everything that we can do in terms of mobile money in order to facilitate things. But we need to see how we can work on de-risking. And on that regard, in Côte d'Ivoire, every year we spend $50 million in feasibility studies on the budget. So we take a couple of projects that we know that the private sector won't necessarily come because they don't have a lot of information about the project. We finance it ourselves to get minimum feasibility studies. We put it on the table and say, these are the projects that we want to do. These are the feasibility studies that we have. Please have a look. And that's definitely helped in easing the process.
Thank you. Did you want to come in? Yes, Aliko has a contribution.
Yes, no, I think my advice, Honorable Minister, it would be better if you get the private sector involved in those feasibilities, because it's not good enough for me to go and collect a government study and work on it. Because if I'm going to invest my own money, I would like to be sure of what's going on. So I need that independence in terms of checking, and so that you don't spend so much money doing feasibilities where I think mainly maybe you need to advise people which areas that you think that are the hanging fruits where people can invest. That is one. And I think one of the issues that we can develop in terms of infrastructure in Africa mainly, which is lacking a lot, it is better to do a PPP rather than for government to go and do it on their own. Because government does not have the capacity and the capability of doing it best for, value of money. So I think it's
right. So that's where the stakeholder engagement is key. Government is not innovative just by its very nature, and so you must engage the private sector. Is there agreement in the room? I see a few smiles there. I come to you now, Minister Oforiatta, and Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame, give credit where credit is due, is showing Africa how we can do things in a new way, has opened his borders, is using innovation. And what can we learn from what is happening in Rwanda? What is Ghana doing maybe in that regard that is similar? And we did hear some things from the president, but what is frontline that each of our countries must be doing, particularly when it comes to the question of borders, integration, and the role we play in stabilizing each of our economies?
Thank you very much. The issue of borders and integration, I think the past 6 weeks or so, our president has been around the region, just really looking to reignite the sense of purpose that ECOWAS represents. And the neighborhood effect is real. If your neighbor is not doing well, either there's going to be some migration that you can't manage, and given that our borders are not well controlled, it becomes a challenge. I think recently we are looking at a strategic partnership with Côte d'Ivoire to see how we can share power, information, and make sure that the relationship between the two countries are strong. I mean, to realize that between Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, we have about 60–70% of the supply of the world's cocoa. And the two countries still remain price takers for cocoa. It's just quite criminal. And it's simply because we have not been talking as sovereign countries, in the same region. So I think those are important things that we should begin to realize, that the neighborhood effect takes more away from us than what we gain by being supposedly independent. I think the borders for ECOWAS are interesting because on one level, you do want the freedom of movement to facilitate sort of a regional market. And really for us, it's, I guess, digitalizing, ensuring that you know who is moving in and out, so that as your country prospers, it radiates across for us. So coming to Paul Kagame, the issue of innovation, there's a lot of Ghanaians actually who have been working in Rwanda for the past 20 years, and we are trying to get them back to come and help us do that. But it's just accountability, knowing what each citizen is doing or each citizen It's programmed in a way that you know the effect that you have on them. So we are moving towards giving everybody a clear ID card. Because if you look at, let's say, Brazil's Bolsa Familiar, you cannot do it effectively if you don't know where people are resided, so that your social interventions can be more targeted instead of, a broad application of that. I think really, in effect, let's be serious about regional integration. Let's understand what we can share with regards to power pool, with regards to trade, with regards to movement of people, and with regards to empowering the citizenhood, so that people can be more entrepreneurial in what they do.
Thank you. I'm going to come to a quick round of final statements from each of you. We're nearly winding up. But I wasn't scheduled to take comments from the floor, but I do want to take 3. If you can keep them to 30 seconds, because I think it is important to get a sense of different contributions from the floor. So please introduce yourself and very briefly make your comment.
Thank you very much. My name is Pakai Kamara. I'm the CEO of Seraka Food Processing Company in Sierra Leone. Actually, this goes to Mr. Alaji Aliko Dangote. We have set up the first meat processing factory in Sierra Leone. We have a capacity to process broilers 1,000 an hour. And cattle and small ruminants, we can do 50 heads per day. The major challenge is feed, which involve maize. During your presentation, you mentioned sugar and rice. What about the possibility of maize?
Wow, thank you for that. Very quickly. Hands? Yes, no? Yes, please. Is there one more? Is there a lady? Sorry, I have to be gender sensitive. There is a lady, okay.
Chukwemeka Chikezie, Sierra Leone Opportunities for Business Action. What does the panel think could be the one thing to really address the informality that where we are in Africa, the majority of Africans are forced to scrabble for a living on a day-by-day basis. There's a big gulf between the formal sector and a lot of what we're talking about and the informal sector. How do we address that? Because without addressing that, the political challenges will actually make it impossible to maintain stable states, etc.
I'm a firm believer in building the informal, which is the foundation of many of our economies, actually. Thank you.
I'm Her Royal Highness Princess Abze Jigma from Burkina Faso, engineer in electricity by profession. So just building on the informality, I created a global expertise app for the informal sector because we do have innovative solutions. I just come from Burkina Faso yesterday where we launched with the youth. They have great ideas and it's important that they also protect their intellectual property. And I hope that the private sector window will also consider this one. And indeed, the informal sector is the basis of our economic growth. In my country, 45% of our GDP coming from the informal sector. And I think that you really need to work also with the women. We didn't talk about that. Thank you for making your question gender balance. And please trust us, we have tools. We have it. So we'll put the money on the table and we can start working because the private sector is already organized. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So important, brings us back to the informal sector and how we need to support the informal sector. The question of women. We know women hold this continent on their shoulders. They manage farms, they manage families, they struggle every single day, and not enough credit is given to the work that women do in this continent. So maybe I will allow just very quickly comments on supporting the informal sector and the role of women and empowering women in growing Africa. Levi, I'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that fintech, for instance, is a way to address informal sector. One of the main problems of informal sectors is exactly you don't have records of what you do, so that you don't build a track record so that people can give you credit, can give you access to things. Now the new technologies are actually Everybody who has a cell phone is building this type of track. So we see that the means of payments can, if you have a platform like in Kenya and other countries, it really dramatically changes the dynamics of inclusion in the economy.
Thank you so much. Aliko, I'll come to you last because you also had the maize question. So, Minister, let me come to you next.
Thank you very much. I think for us, the issue of the realization that the informal sector is huge, but somehow we are having a psychosis and making them invisible. It's a problem. So the issue of the national ID card is key, because through that you can have direct interventions policies that addresses that. And for us this year, the national budget for 2018 coming is going to be undergirded by the issue of SDGs and gender, so that the awareness and clarity is there, and all ministries will then have to respond to an environment in which we are saying the combination of SDGs and gender is really the future, and that's what we are trying to design now.
I guess I have to. I think that there is a link, obviously, between the informal sector and women. Women are overrepresented in the informal sector, and that's no bad thing. After all, if the informal sector flourishes, it supports the formal sector. So if you're being optimistic, as I always am, it should be a win-win situation. The World Bank itself did a study not long ago on a group in rural South Africa that showed that economic activity among women increased by almost 10% when they had access to power. So if they can run sewing machines and all the other things that women often do while juggling all their other responsibilities, providing power is as important there as it is for the big businesses. So I'm optimistic. There are lots of ways to provide power to people. It's not only people like us who build large power plants, but it's distributed power, it's small power projects of various kinds, particularly renewable ones, that will be the future for encouraging the informal sector to develop and finally join the formal sector in due course. And
I understand Tanzania is doing very interesting things around microgrids within communities as well. Minister Sise.
Yeah, so same as they already said, informal sector is key. We need to have them move from the informal sector to the formal sector. So first thing that we believe is we need to ease the process of creating companies, to give them incentives to do it. Otherwise, they don't have any incentive to do it. Second thing, you need to give them access to market. And that's something that we try to do. Right now, in the budget, we make sure that 20% of all the procurement goes to SMEs. So they have an incentive to create the company. Last year, we did a tax amnesty to say to all companies, we just want you to come and register. So we gave it during 4 months, and in 4 months, we have more than 6,000 companies that came and registered. So there is definitely something to be done. We haven't found the good solution, but we're moving gradually towards it. We need to have the informal sector coming. We gave also tax exemption for 2 years on a couple of taxes, so that 2 years after your creation, you don't pay taxes. We reduce import tax on all the IT items, so like on computers and all. Now the tax is around 5%. Also to get people more involved in tech, to really help unleash the potential in the tech sector. So we really open for business. I think there's definitely great opportunities in Africa. There's a problem of risk perception, and we need to fix it together with the private sector.
Thank you. Aliko, over to you. And you had the maize question as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think the informal sector, they need quite a lot of, first of all, market. Number 2 is to do with training and also credit. What we are doing, as a company, we have a foundation which we partner with the bank, because most of them, they get very, very high interest rates, maybe 5% a month or whatever. So what we've done, is that we've signed an agreement with the Bank of Industry, because since we are not a bank, but our foundation gave the first tranche of 2.5 billion, and we are now about to release the other 2.5 billion. We will give them 10 billion naira, and which they will also match. But our money attracts zero interest. Their own will attract 10% for administration and whatever. So eventually they will get interest at about 5%. So if they get that, then that will help them, quite a lot. And we also do help women where we give them some seed money. This is just free money. And we do it in almost like 1,000 people per local government in Nigeria. We started that 2 years ago, and we hope by next year we're going to finish, which is almost about 10 billion naira, which we are giving. That is in terms of helping. Then in terms of training, we have what you call Cement Technology Institute. We will be launching to train 100,000 people every year for the next 5 years. And this will be free training. They will be given a certificate where they can now go and, fend for themselves. So that is one. On the maize issue, well, we are not yet into maize, but what we are trying to do now on maize is to assist and help those people who are growing maize in terms of changing the seedlings so that they can be having high yield. Because the biggest challenge we have in Africa is that the yield per hectare is always very low. You see somebody now, for example, growing maize, and he's having only 2 tons or 3 tons per hectare instead of something like 8, 9 tons per hectare. So these are the issues where we are also trying to help to assist people who are doing maize. We are not going to do maize directly because we cannot be everywhere.
Okay, I can tell if you've been watching politics in East Africa, maize is big. So, but that's a story for another day. Final question, literally parting shot in under 30 seconds. We need to achieve these SDGs. We are all in this. We only have a few years, I think it's 2030, where you're sitting with the responsibility you have and the influence you wield. What do you hope to achieve, either in your organization or in your government by 2030? Joaquin, I'll start with you.
Well, of course, by 2030 we have our twin goals, and that's what we want to achieve. I said eliminate the poverty, extreme poverty, and share prosperity. I think in particular in Africa, and well ahead of that, I think especially in economies like here in Ghana, Ivory Coast, and several others, the stage of development is such that it's very clear that people need and can afford to pay for energy and for efficient infrastructure that will increase their productivity so much. So this is what we have to focus and achieve, and I think that through the cascade and the private sector window, we are in a good position together with governments to get there.
Thank you so much. Aliko, please.
Well, I think my own thinking is that, my own dream is that I think both private sector and public sector should team up together and see how we can get our people out of poverty, creating jobs. And the only way to create jobs is to focus on industrialization and agriculture, and also supplying enough power for our people. And I think if we can really target that, then education, of course, to train the people who will run the businesses going forward. With this, I think we'll achieve quite a lot. If we're going to take 10 different things, we might not achieve much. So let's pick up the most important ones, 3 to 4, and I'm sure we'll get there.
Thank you so much, Minister Sisi.
It's hard to speak after the two of them because I'm really in the same direction. I think the biggest challenge for the continent is demographic transition. So this is the biggest challenge.
Thank you so much. Helen?
Well, I hope that by 2030 I shall be happily retired and looking after my grandchildren. But until then, I just hope that we can go on doing what we are doing now, and that we can go on providing the power that's so desperately badly needed throughout the continent.
Thank you so much, Mr. Faryad.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think, in coming into government is just the realization of the waste that we have and the issue of corruption. And, you know, going around the country and asking why a fellow citizen should experience such raw poverty. And it sort of challenges your very humanity as to how this can be possible when you come and look at national accounts and see what you are wasting. Anyhow, the challenge, as I mentioned, for us now is how do we create a budget in 2018 which clearly has SDG values and gender values, because that is the core of our informal sector. And how do I create a situation where the awareness is national and it's not an issue of only government addressing that? So our hope and expectation is that by using that as a basis, we'll really address the fundamental issue of citizenship responsibility for this poverty and be able to cap down corruption. Because there has to be shared prosperity. And even in the 2017 budget, a huge part of it was what we call the preferential option for the poor, just to ensure that even as you reduce taxes on the corporate level, nuisance taxes for the informal sector were also eliminated. So we really hoping that the country itself's awareness will be enhanced by how we frame the budget, and in that we'll have a society that is more humane and that is just fairer and just for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me end by saying it's not their question to answer. It's all our responsibility to have an answer to that question. And quite a few years ago, I was able to attend a leadership course at Harvard. You don't know this, Aliko Dangote, but it's courtesy of your Young Global Leaders World Economic Forum program. And so you're not just giving back here, you're giving back at every level and trying to build African leaders. As a result of that, I started something called Great Debaters Contest in Kenya, 500 schools last year. We're going to do more than 500 schools this year, and we're teaching all the students about SDGs and challenging each school to choose one SDG to champion. So my words as we close this session, thank you, as we close this session, let's embrace the fact that the challenge is it's not government's challenge, it's not private sector's challenge, it's not the World Bank's challenge. Each of us has a challenge, and we must step up and do something. And if we're not doing something as Africans, then we shouldn't be sitting at the table complaining. I will wind up by saying there is a press conference for the media in the Pearl Room, so please do make your way there, and I hand over to Tom. Thank you so much to the panel, please. Thank you.
All right, there are 3 very important things you need to know before you move to your first networking break. Number 1, if you have not registered, picked up your name tag, as well as your very important survey, 2-sided survey, you're going to want to do that during this networking break. It's critical that we get these surveys from each of you. Very easy to fill out. We need it back within the next 30 to 45 minutes so we can use this data as we move forward in the program. So please make sure you do register. That is number 1. Number 2, social media is open, and we encourage you to be very active on social media. The main hashtag is DFF Africa. There is a social media handout out in the lobby you can pick up. There's a selfie wall out there if you want to post some photos. We also have the graphics that my team is creating. Please feel free to be very active in social media. Once again, it is hashtag DFF Africa. And finally, number 3, when you come back from your networking break, you will find a table number on the back side of your name tag. That indicates the table number that you will go to when you return. So you're going to want to package up all of your things, carry it with you. You'll be coming back most likely to a different table, and the tables are noted. One starts in the front all the way through 41 in the back. So please enjoy yourselves, please network, please be back in 20 minutes. See you then.